Okay, live stream is happening. If anybody's on the YouTube channel, we will be getting started in a minute. And Jose, when I do click start webinar and it starts recording, you may want to wait, tell folks that we're welcoming and waiting and not really get started until you see more folks in the attendee group, because it takes folks a while to get in. Okay, I have 8 o'clock. I will start webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paz. Thank you, friends, for joining this session, this ecological education session that is the fourth part of the Laudato Si in the U.S. Catholic Church Conference that is co-hosted by Creighton University and Catholic Climate Covenant. My name is Jose Aguto, and I work for the Covenant. And I am thankful that you are attending this session, and I'm especially thankful for our panelists for joining us today to share their expertise and wisdom on this important topic of ecological education. Before we begin, there are some housekeeping rules that I'd like to share with you. I'm going to share my screen for a moment. And pause if you'd like to start. Well, first to say, sorry, that the session is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to everyone who registered within the next 24 to 48 hours. And if you're on the Zoom platform, please type your questions in the Q&A box. If you're watching the live stream on the Covenant's YouTube channel, please email your questions to info@catholicclimatecovenant.org. If you know who the question is directed to, please add that information to your question. The chat is available for you to chat with others attending this session. It should not be used to submit questions. We request that everyone be civil and respectful in the chat. And please know that you won't be able to save the chat. And Paz, I'm wondering if you could provide us some direction on the...
Could you bring it back to the first slide? Thank you.
Sure.
This is information for all our Spanish-speaking attendees. Esta es la información para todos los que hablan español. ¿Cómo escuchar la interpretación? Vayan a los controles correspondientes a esta reunión abajo donde dice interpretación, y haga clic en ese globo donde dice interpretation. Allí va a hacer clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar. Opcional es para escuchar el idioma interpretado, haga clic en Mute Original para que no escuchar el original, es para silenciar el audio original. Solamente esto va a trabajar si están en Zoom. Si están mirando a través de live streaming de YouTube, van a tener que mandar su correo electrónico al info@catholicclimatecovenant.org, porque no va a haber otra forma de comunicarse. Una cosa que José dijo anteriormente que quiero decirles es que esto va a ser grabado y les vamos a mandar esto en 24 a 48 horas. Y el chat es donde la gente que está en Zoom puede colocar sus preguntas. Gracias. Okay, Jose. All done.
Thank you, Paz. Before we begin, I'd like to do an opening prayer. Because we have some marvelous educators with us, I'd like to begin with a prayer for St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, who many of you know established the first Catholic church, the first Catholic school in Baltimore, Maryland in 1808. And eventually the Sisters of Charity created some 20 orphanages, schools, and other kinds of offerings to young people in 8 states and Washington, D.C. area. So wanting to honor St. Elizabeth Ann Seton today and our teachers here with us today, and ask that we take a moment and place ourselves in the presence of God. Lord God, your spirit of wisdom fills the earth and teaches us your ways. Look upon these teachers. Let them strive to share their knowledge with gentle patience and endeavor always to bring truth to eager minds. Grant that they may follow Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life forever and ever. Amen. Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, pray for us. Thank you. So before we begin, I'd like to provide some background on this conference and the purpose of this session. We at the Catholic Climate Covenant are blessed to lift up the Laudato Si goals as part of the Vatican's Laudato Si action platform. And as you can see on this slide, there are 7 such goals. Today we are dealing with one of them, the 4th in our series in the Laudato Si in the US conference on ecological education. And also to know that there will be additional sessions, as you may see, 4 additional sessions, including a closing awards on July 27th, and we welcome you to join those sessions as well. We at the Catholic Climate Covenant are also blessed to be the US hub for the implementation of the Laudato Si action platform. And we have lifted up this site, godsplanet.us, in the service of the US Catholic Church to celebrate those activities across the 7 sectors and across the 7 goals that we've mentioned. And so we welcome you to visit this site, godsplanet.us, and also to provide us any information and good news that you may have so that we may lift that up for the larger Catholic community and all other peoples. And so very excited to bring to you 3 exemplary educators working with college students and high school students, bringing together pedagogies which are proven effective. And so I have been blessed to chat with the panelists, and the way that we've framed this session is, first of all, recognizing that a majority of Americans have experienced extreme weather events in their own community over the past year. And this is through a poll done by the Pew Research Center that was just sent out in late June. And likely many more people now, because of the extreme weather events, are having this unfortunate direct experience. We also know that millennials and the young people of the Gen Z are consistently ranking climate change as one of their highest priorities, and they take it very seriously. And they also experience a lot of climate anxiety. We also note, having had these discussions with the panelists, that a lot of the younger generation receive their information from social media. And then a lot of the folks from this generation are nominally associated with their faith, may not be informed about their faith, or are leaving the faith. So the question that we posed, taking it from the circumstance of the students, is how can we educate, equip, and inspire young people in these situations? How can we bring the lens of faith into these circumstances that will provide them with joy, courage, and confidence to step into this most epic challenge of human civilization? What are the techniques that we are using to do that, to accompany them, and to bring, at least from the Catholic perspective, the joy of the gospel, which is time-tested, into this space, so that we all can address the climate crisis with a kind of strength and a kind of knowledge and courage that brings the younger generations into this as protagonists of change. And so with that, I am blessed to hand this off to our 3 educators, and they will go in the order of Erin Brigham, Sage Lanier, and Kate McGarry-Vossi. And I want to introduce them individually, and before handing it off first to Erin. And Aaron is the executive director of the Joan and Ralph Lane Center for Catholic Social Thought and the Ignatian Tradition, and affiliate faculty in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of San Francisco. Sage is the founder and executive director of Sustainable and Just Futures. She's an educator activist focused on justice-oriented environmental solutions. And at 19 years old, she began teaching her record-breaking program, Sustainable and Just Future, which has enrolled 1,800 students and counting at the University of California, Berkeley. Among other things, Time Magazine recently named Sage a 2023 Next Generation Leader for her work on climate and environmental education. And lastly, pleased to have Kate McGarry-Vossi with us. She is a theology and humanities teacher at Saul Point Catholic High School, where she has taught for over 40 years. And she helped develop the Carmelite NGO curriculum on Laudato Si, and in 2018 presented the curriculum to the annual Administrators Conference of the Office of Catholic Schools in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And the students at Saul Point Catholic High School have been touched across all subject areas as a result of her initiative and the support of other faculty members. And so with that, I want to hand it off to Aaron, and thank you so much for being with us today. Aaron.
Thank you. Thanks, Jose, for the beautiful prayer and generous introduction. Thank you to the Catholic Climate Covenant and Creighton University for hosting this event. It's an honor to co-present with Kate and Sage, and I'm excited to learn from both of you. So I am just going to share slides. I have minimalist slides, but I have given this a lot of thought, just minimal slides with some beautiful scenery. So I come to this conversation from a university context. I direct a Center for Catholic Social Thought, and I teach related undergraduate courses at the University of San Francisco. So USF is a Jesuit university, and it's inspired by the Ignatian educational tradition and the Universal Apostolic Preferences, or UAPs, which will frame some of my remarks this evening. So those of you in a Jesuit context, you'll probably relate, but those of you who don't, I think that these speak to deep longings and really speak to the topic of this evening, because the UAPs are showing the way to God through the spiritual exercises and discernment, walking with the marginalized, caring for our common home, and journeying with youth in the creation of a hope-filled future. So Jose invited us today to begin our reflection on, who these youth are, their context, their hopes, dreams, fears, and longings. I will say at USF, I am privileged to journey with a diverse community of young people, so it's difficult to make generalizations. But for the purposes of this reflection, I think it's helpful to mention that when I go into a classroom, I assume that students relate to faith in a variety of ways. Some are Catholic, some are not, some are religious, some are not. This context is really what Charles Taylor describes in A Secular Age. It's not marked by a disappearance of religion, and certainly not a disappearance in spirituality or longing for the transcendent, but it's a context that's characterized by multiple ways of relating to faith. So in the same classroom, I might have a student who really identifies with a faith tradition as a central part of their life, and another who is just genuinely baffled or curious by religious belonging. So addressing the International Association of Jesuit Universities last year, Father General Arturo Sosa spoke about a secular context in positive terms, as a place to cultivate meaning through freedom. He likens a secular context to thirsty soil. So in this talk, I want to reflect on some of the ways that I've better understood this thirsty soil in the classroom by offering some anecdotal moments of teaching Laudato Si, and offer some thoughts on a pedagogy that allows us to walk with youth toward a hope-filled future. But first, I just wanted to share kind of an image of what thirsty soil means to me. So I live in San Francisco now, but I grew up in the Rocky Mountains of Western Montana on the ancestral homeland of the Salish people. And before I had the language of faith, the mountains taught me about God in the experience of awe and the gratitude of the immense beauty of the place. The mountains were everlasting, even as seasons changed. And in Montana, I learned the smell of thirsty soil when the rain comes after a long, hot summer. When the rain's received by the thirsty soil, it generates something new. The water and the soil is transformed. And I think if hope had a smell, it might be that, like the smell of thirsty soil. And I think this is a helpful metaphor for identifying some of the possibilities in ecological education, that we're co-creating a hope-filled future with our students and looking for these pathways of hope together. So I'll come back to this idea when I talk about the pedagogy that I've been engaging to promote ecological education. But first, just going to oh, sorry, this was my quote from Sosa here on thirsty soil. But first, just teaching about Laudato Si, if I can. So I've seen how Laudato Si touches the thirsts and the longings of my students. So I want to just share a couple of examples that I have encountered in teaching Catholic social thought. So the longings I want to reflect on are the longing for connection, depth, and purpose. These longings counter the threats to higher education that Arturo Sosa identifies in the talk that I mentioned, and those are fragmentation, superficiality, and instrumentality. So when I invite students to identify a passage in Laudato Si that resonates with them, this one often comes up, and it's one of my favorites. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or a mere setting in which we live. We're part of nature, included in it, and in constant interaction with it. So I observe in my students a sincere desire for connection, and I find that many of them are perceptively aware of barriers and opportunities for realizing community, particularly in light of the experience of the pandemic. I think that Pope Francis names it well when Pope Francis names it really well when he talks about the potential for technology to connect us, and then the reality that it sometimes separates us from real encounter. So perhaps the most important task of the first week of the semester is to create opportunities for students to shift their attention from their computer screens and their phones toward each other, to learn about each other and share something about themselves before we begin the course. And one simple question I like to ask, which invites students to share something meaningful about themselves while also reflecting about this quote from Laudato Si, is just to describe a place that has shaped who you are, like I did with the Rocky Mountains. So the second longing that Laudato Si evokes is this desire for depth, which can be related to a desire for freedom from consumerism, which distracts us from depth, as Laudato Si mentions. So I invite students to read chapter 6 of Laudato Si and to reflect on what ecological spirituality means to them. Recently, a student pulled this quote: "A constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle the heart and prevent us from cherishing each thing and each moment." And in her sharing, she generated a conversation on the ways that consumerism operates in our culture and within ourselves, where students were able to name this desire from a freedom from making a lot of money and having enough. And within this conversation, which was just last semester, there emerged this fear that AI would make their work obsolete in the near future. So they named this tension that I think a lot of us experience, of this desire to have security and make enough money, and this desire for purposeful work and make a positive change in the world. And within this larger conversation on work, there was this point of entry into Francis's critique of the technocratic paradigm, this idea that we measure the value of things and the value of human activities through a narrow definition of progress. And in class, we engage in some imaginative exercises around what success might look like and what values are underlying our version of success. Many students find Francis's words liberating when he talks about simplicity and humility in relation to happiness. So moving to think about a pedagogy, right? Creating a life free from consumerism, experiencing ourselves as part of nature and not outside it, and cultivating collective action to address the ecological crisis necessitates a pedagogy that engages imagination and fosters freedom and collective action. So in my final few minutes, I want to draw upon going back to some language that Arturo Sosa uses to emphasize the centrality of discernment in Ignatian education. He says the Spirit guides through what we might call a pedagogy of grace, opening our senses to the signs of the present that lead us to a future object of hope and our effort. And I like this language because it draws us into the present through our senses and concrete realities and moves us toward this hope-filled future. Those of us who work in a Jesuit educational context have this Ignatian pedagogical paradigm as a tool to help us connect context, reflection, and action. And all of us formed by the Catholic social tradition have the language of see, judge, act, right, to connect observation, analysis, reflection, and action. And I think that Sosa's emphasis on discernment also helps illuminate some things that are particularly important in ecological education. So I'll just offer a few concrete ideas of what this might look like, kind of reframing see, judge, act to encounter, discern, and respond. One thing that the Ignatian emphasis on see, judge, act offers is a great attention to one's sensory experiences as points of connection to one's interior life. This approach relies on the idea that God communicates through our concrete experiences in the world, which Sosa here affirms in this pedagogy of grace. And I think this is an important aspect of ecological education, right? That it starts with concrete encounters with nature and experiencing ourselves as intimately connected to nature through our senses. So beginning before engaging in readings and discussion, I often will ask my students to just walk outside. So at USF, we're privileged to be close to Golden Gate Park, which has this potential to transport a person from this urban environment right into nature. There's redwoods and oak trees. And another thing that I like about Ignatian pedagogy is it emphasizes reflection as a way to foster depth. So one thing that can be missed in, I think, in the language of see, judge, act is the importance of bringing one's interior life into the conversation about what we're seeing and judging, right? Postmodern thought has revealed what Ignatius knew all along, that we don't arrive at truth by being an objective observer, but by discerning it through paying attention to dynamics of freedom and unfreedom and what are our biases and where is that leading us. So one tool that I've used to foster discernment in ecological education is the Ignatian Examen. So the Jesuit Conference Office of Justice and Ecology and the Ignatian Solidarity Network developed a great tool, an ecological examen. You can find it on the ISN website. And it gives students a deeper awareness of not only the problems that exist in the way that humans relate to the environment, but the way that it impacts them as individuals and their communities and how they participate in it. And the Ignatian Examen and Ignatian pedagogical paradigm is forward thinking and action oriented. So the practical orientation of this approach to learning is also particularly helpful in ecological education because there's an urgency to respond to the cry of the earth, not through isolated actions, but collective action rooted in connection. So by encountering, discerning, and responding to the signs of God at work in the world, we can better co-create with young people this hope-filled future that they deserve. And as a parent, as an educator, I can see nothing more important than this task. And I know that Kate and Sage have a lot of wisdom to offer on this as well. So I'm going to stop there and turn to Kate.
Actually, we're turning to Sage, if you don't mind. No worries.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you, Sage, for joining us.
Hi, yeah, no worries. Either way, we'll hear from Kate next. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Let me get my slides up. So oh, there we go. It's good, right? Okay, awesome. I'm here to talk to you all a little bit about my approach to solutions-oriented ecological education. So my name is Sage Lanier, and I am the founder of a newer organization, Sustainable and Just Future. It's an off branch of a program that I started at Berkeley while I was a student there. And I'll tell you a little about it. So I got my start in education kind of untraditionally because I didn't necessarily have a PhD or qualifications to teach, but I was a very passionate young person about gender equality and racial equality. And then I came to the environment with the realization that there's, no human rights on a dead planet, one movement to encapsulate them all. And so I decided to study environmental studies when I went off to university, and I felt that my education was extremely focused on the problem. And I would often argue with my professors for various reasons, and a lot of it being their approach. A lot of the message that was being reinforced with us as students was that it was too late to do anything meaningful about the ecological crisis. And obviously that led to a sense of hopelessness amongst my peers. A lot of people I know were starting to feel very depressed or very anxious. And I had some friends who even decided to switch out of what we were studying because they were like, it's so important, but for my mental health, I just can't handle it. Like, I don't feel like there is something meaningful that we can do or that I can do in my career here. Kind of like an ignorance is bliss thing almost. So I was really frustrated with this narrative and also really confused about all of these different and seemingly disparate, unconnected topics that I was learning about, like topsoil collapse. We're losing our ability to feed ourselves, but also climate change. And then they'd kind of maybe get into like, fast fashion is really bad for the planet. And I was like, okay, but how bad? Like, how big is that industry? And there were all of these different things, and they all seemed really unconnected. And also, we were really only learning about the problem and the nuances of the problem and how the history of the problem, came to be. And it was just really focused negatively. So my university offered a really unique program called the DECAL program, where students can teach to their peers. So when I was 19, when I was a sophomore, a second year in university, I started teaching. And I think at first, my program was a little more problem oriented, my best attempt at the time was basically to bring together all of these problems that I felt like were really important and like seemingly disconnected. Because I was like, well, I'm learning about topsoil collapse and how we're going to run out of like the ability to feed ourselves in the next couple of years. But my parents have never heard of that. No one from my community has ever heard of that. So I was like, maybe our first problem is that people don't know about this stuff. And then I started, as the next semester, I started realizing that wasn't helping either, to just bring together all the problems into one place, and that it needed to be solutions oriented. So I started making the lectures like, so we only introduce the problem for maybe 10 minutes, just so that you understand that there is a problem, and maybe, a few key points about it. But then we spend the majority of the program talking about the solutions, the next steps, what, different interventions are available to us, whether it's things we can do as a community, policy we can advocate for, maybe ideally on the community level as well, because I think those international fights can seem very daunting and overwhelming. So I was looking more so at like, what things could we go advocate for at city council or at the state level, something much smaller than like national climate, legislation. And so we were looking at, like, what changes can we make as individuals, communities, cities, culture shift, and like kind of starting to build a vision for what a better world could look like. You see that byline here. So eventually this kind of program became a vision of hope, and it grew really fast. I started off with 25 students, and the next semester I had 50, and then 85, 160, and then 300, which had never been done before. It wasn't allowed. We had to kind of bend the rules for that. And I've graduated, and it's continued to be taught by a wonderful team of women who are, we work really closely together. And I decided to launch the nonprofit because I feel that the majority, in the first place, climate education is or ecological education is non-existent. And what is out there is typically the scare to care model of trying, I think a lot of educators are maybe stuck mentally in this idea that people still don't believe climate change is real or something. So you have to like scare them and really help them understand the science so that they get it. But they're not realizing that this generation gets it, knows that climate change is real, and doesn't need to be any more scared than we already are, because we're all terrified. So, it's more helpful to have a conversation that's solutions oriented, that's action focused. What are we going to do next? What are the ways out? How do we make sure that our communities are prepared for climate disasters? How do we make sure that we can continue to feed people as, regions change, drought happens, maybe this part of the world or this part of the country won't always be able, or will have flooding or drought or something, and we're used to getting strawberries from there. What are we going to do? How do we adapt? The die has kind of been tossed for a lot of it. Like there's no way to solve or reverse climate change at this point. There needs to be a lot of adapting, and obviously a lot of decarbonization. We have to use less fossil fuels and emit less carbon. But we also have to adapt, because things are going to change and we don't have a choice about the change at this point. So I've always been very struck by this quote from Naomi Klein. If opposition movements are to do more than burn bright and then burn out, they will need a comprehensive vision for what should emerge in the place of our failing system. It's not enough to be angry. It's not enough to wave signs. It's not enough even to go, yell at fossil fuel executives and say, you destroyed our future, because obviously they did. And obviously all those things are very important, but also beyond that, we are going to have maybe a sense of resilient hope. We're going to have a vision for moving forward. So in this program, we emphasize solutions, and we kind of walk through a path of, so we start off with kind of talking about, oh, these are outdated actually, this on the right side of the screen. We have different titles and whatnot now. But we kind of walk through how we arrived at the ecological crisis to just give people some historical context and a bit of background. And then we move into talking about the supply chain and how like our economy and global capitalism and like this system of consumerism is completely at odds with the ecological systems that keep us alive. And so that's kind of your intro. And then we start going into more positive, solutions oriented. We talk about cradle to cradle design as a design framework for the way that we make and use and interact with our belongings and the materials that our lives are made of, toxicity. You know, a lot of things in the modern era are made of plastic, and we obviously used to get by without it. Plastic is a petrochemical, it's a petroleum byproduct, so it does, you know, contribute to climate change to have these materials in our world. And it's not just plastic. I mean, it's like paint. The paint that's on our walls and stuff is it's also a plastic. So things like that. We talk about the circular economy and having an economic system that's more based on services, experiences, knowledge, rather than the sale of goods, because our economy is, you know, we have this hyper consumerist economy, and it's just unsustainable. And we talk about urban planning. You know, we're planning for 10 billion people by 2050. What's the most sustainable way to organize those people? Where do we put them? Should we do cities? Should we do, rural, or, how are we going to feed them? Those sorts of things. We have an entire lecture on environmental justice, and we're also just added one in about TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and indigenous ancestral practices, if you will. And then food systems. We talk about the modern food system and all the nuances and a vision for a regenerative and resilient food system. Then we go into decarbonization and et cetera, et cetera. We keep going. The feedback from this program has been incredibly overwhelming, not just through the numbers of it growing to serve almost 2,000 people so far in a couple of years, but also like the testimonials. People will say, this was life-changing for me. I'm simply not the person I was before this class. This particular bit of feedback, it was from this woman named Rose Wilson, and I cry every time I read it, a little bit. And people saying that they now feel equipped to understand and implement environmental solutions, and with a justice-oriented lens. That's my number one goal, and that's what really feeds me to continue doing this work. So 2/3 of our program participants are non-environmental, are not studying anything related to the environment, which is amazing, because one of the central goals of this is to be very accessible, no jargon. You don't need to know anything environmentally related in order to come in and get a full understanding. Sorry. Okay. And also the feedback of the people who have said that as a direct result of this program, they decided to get involved in an environmental organization or initiative, 71%, which is pretty fantastic. So, this program and running it has been my life for a few years now, and I felt I could see the potential in it, and that's why I decided to start the nonprofit. So we are fundamentally advocating for and providing solutions-oriented, action-focused environmental education. So whether we are setting up new programs at universities or high schools, or even starting a like an elementary school curriculum right now. We're working on it. So we are either setting up programs ourselves, or we are helping educators or helping students start campaigns, advocacy to demand better and more environmental education, with the goal of creating, a climate educated next generation of people, so that we're not only equipped to survive and adapt in a climate changed world, but also that, each of us as we move into our careers are informed as to, because one of the biggest problems is lack of knowledge. I think folks are still going into fashion careers and working at Coca-Cola and working at IKEA, and oh my gosh, I've got this job at Amazon. How amazing am I? And everybody's like, oh my God, you got a 6-figure job at Amazon. And it is my hope that if all of these different folks and all these different careers, I just dropped a pen. All these different folks and all those different careers, if they had a real climate framework from their education growing up, they would be able to approach, maybe you don't want to work at Amazon or Coca-Cola, but be able to approach these careers, these jobs, these, because collectively these are the people who make decisions that shape our world. There's this whole like individual action versus system change kind of thing, but really, what is the system if not individuals? Like, it's not AI. I mean, it kind of is if you look at BlackRock, but let's not get too in the weeds there. But yeah, so basically that people would be able to move forward with more empathy, a better understanding of how all of these different industries and frameworks interact with the world and the people in the systems, who's doing the mining, who's doing the sowing, who is doing the cooking and the harvesting, etc. The justice-oriented lens to make sure that we're prioritizing fair wages and good living conditions for ideally everyone. So yeah, with a environmental justice educated next generation, I think we could see the world change in a very short amount of time. And that's why I do the work that I do.
Brilliant, inspiring. Thank you so much, Sage. And also thrilled to hand over the mic to Kate.
And I am going to share my screen. And Erin is a minimalist with slides, and I'm a saturator with slides, just so you know, because that's how we roll at the secondary level. I'd like just to acknowledge that it's a great pleasure to be back at the Creighton Conference with Catholic Climate Covenant. I participated in 2019, and my experience there as I represented Sal Point and our programming was that there was such a rich sharing of other people's experiences, lessons, units, resources for teachers, for students, for professional development. And my sincerest wish is that this will be a prompt for those of you out there who are part of our Catholic schools community to be generous and to share your resources as we come together tonight. And I also have to acknowledge that I'm part of a wonderful faculty, and there is a core group of really dedicated people who have been committed and who have been converted and transformed as we've journeyed with Laudato Si over the last 6 years. And so I'm trying to faithfully represent part of what that journey has meant for us, and also share a lot, I hope, of useful resources. Everything that I will include in my presentation is basically available for you as a resource, and I'll share the link to the slides at the end of the program. I want to start with the ways in which we have committed to keeping our students hands-on and engaged in the embrace of Laudato Si and our Care for Creation ethic. We at Salpointe are a co-ed, 1,250 students, 85 full-time faculty. We are sponsored by the Carmelites, and the Carmelites have been very important in providing the foundation for our commitment and for our ongoing resources and our ongoing incorporation of the mission in our school mission. We do have a steering committee at school that oversees the annual or the yearly initiatives, and that includes school leadership, it includes teachers, and it includes students, and always a student council liaison who winds up being really, really important to our communication. We also have been provided a modest budget, and so we're lucky that we're getting some financial support as well in our efforts. Our intent for our students and these initiatives that I'm going to share with you are for the entire school community. These are not based in classrooms, these are school-wide initiatives. And we decided that we wanted to maintain a hands-on approach, that we wanted to form new habits and new attitudes, hopefully, with our students, and in as many ways as possible, engage students in the joys and in the responsibilities of caring for creation. So at our facility and with the blessings that we have been doing paper recycling for years. We are also now composting our lunch scraps, and I'll have a little bit more to say about that in just a couple of minutes. We have a seasonal garden that we plant for winter and for spring. We have monthly challenges to introduce new habits in our students and connect that to an understanding of why those new habits are important. We sponsored collection of electronics waste and batteries for recycling this year. We maintain a Care for Creation Week and Earth Day celebrations, and we have instituted an annual award for a student who exemplifies the kind of the commitment to ethic, care for creation, and practices that are called by our Laudato Si teaching. These are all ongoing and, directed to the entire school community. I wanted to give you just a little bit of a glimpse into what the monthly challenges looked like. And we implemented these in the attempt to form new habits. So one month was, we are going to say no to plastic and encourage everybody to use reusable water bottles, or hydro flasks, reusable lunch containers, and reusable lunch utensils. Another month, we collected jeans as a part of a repurpose and recycle, and all of those jeans were connected to our support of the migrant hospitality centers that are here in Southern Arizona. We have a diocesan center, and we also have a Jesuit affiliated and a Jesuit sponsored Kino Border Initiative in Nogales that we support. Another month, we identified the agencies, centers, and groups that recycle and repurpose in the community, who they are, where they are located, and what they wind up, taking and recycling or repurposing. 1 month, December, the challenge was to do Christmas decorations in the classrooms with recycled materials only. And we rolled out our composting program as a monthly challenge to begin with. And then of course, we're keeping it going. So at the end of this last year, the homeroom, which is how we sort of have our students organized for the purpose of doing business, the homeroom that had done the most, participated the most, and this is where student council were helpful in kind of keeping tabs and counting on all of this data. The homeroom, the group that had kind of done the most, we presented with this reusable tote bag, and they were honored as being the greenest homeroom in the school this year. I wanted to share with you also a couple of just pieces that were generated for our Earth Week celebration, to show how creative our teachers are, but also to show how usable this approach is. In 2022, one of our faculty designed a set of slides that would be used each day during Earth Week. And she introduced it with this quote from Chief Seattle. And then each day had a different focus or a different teaching point. And Tuesdays was loving God's creation. And she included a prayer so that each teacher could use this at the beginning of their own class. We do have an expectation at our school that class begins with prayer every day. And then the action step for Tuesday was to find out and to visit a whole lot of wonderful sites that are part of a digital presence of people taking care of, managing, responding to the need to care for our creation. And you can see that it's marvelous. And the last piece for each day was to highlight a young person who is active and making a difference. And for Tuesday, Autumn Pelletier from Canada was the person who was highlighted and used as a source of inspiration. And at this point, I want to just kind of piggyback on something that Sage said. We have gone beyond that scare to care thing. That's kind of where we started off as well 6 years ago, and we're way beyond that now. And I appreciated your sharing that I'm going to use that again. I want to switch for a couple of moments to focusing on our faculty. The previous offerings were about student engagement, but we've also had a very significant group of our faculty really embraced the principles, the teachings, and the directions that are provided through Laudato Si. And the slide that I've started with is a recognition of that unity of creation and that unity too of learning. One of the best practices that we kind of stumbled onto, we did not know that this would be this powerful, but we made the expectation, and this came through our school leadership, that as we were becoming more involved and more committed to Laudato Si, that every teacher would make an explicit inclusion of a connection, of a value, of an action that came directly from their understanding of implementing Laudato Si in one of their lessons or in one of their units. We had a whole semester to do that. And after that semester was completed, we had a faculty meeting the following semester, and the accountability for including the Laudato Si lesson was done live, and it was done in our big meeting room, and the screen was on, and the Google Sheet that was live was being displayed, and everybody had to populate their lesson or their unit, what the value, what the action, what the connection was to Laudato Si, and they also had to populate, materials, supplies, those kinds of things. What that wound up doing was provided just a cauldron of creativity and shared ideas and wonderful support that was generated as people saw what each other had been doing. And I've been a teacher a long time, and one of the last things that teachers want to hear is that the principal wants you to do thus and so, and you're going to have to report how it goes, or you're going to have to provide the lesson plan. We didn't handle it that way for this, and as a result, it just provided tremendous positive energy, tremendous practical applications, and it also provided for some of our faculty a real step into a deeper dive into how they were going to transform their curricula and their coursework with Laudato Si in mind. And that is my next invitation to you. My friend Brian Holstrom is a master teacher in our social studies department. He is the teacher of world history. He's one of our teachers of world history. He teaches AP world history as well. He has taken Laudato Si to a scholarly level and then taken it into his classroom, taking an ecological lens into world history, into ancient and more recent civilizations. And he's calling it kind of an eco-conscious world history that he has wound up being inspired by, and he has presented nationally. I've linked the article for you, and there is an ongoing teacher forum sharing resources and insights in this area. He's a great example of how our deeper conversion has been a reality, not just for our students, we hope, but also for ourselves. We also have in our STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math. We also have a director, Cecilia Gosler, who has likewise embraced the importance of the Laudato Si teachings. And in her program, she has established kind of a vertical presence and an ongoing commitment to more and more of her engineering projects, more and more of her engineering teaching is devoted to the principles of bringing our students along in the understanding of the world in which their solutions are needed. And this is an example from last year of a senior project that identified a problem and created a solution with a solar approach. And at the end of our school year, all of her students did a showcase at which we celebrated all of their success, all of their learning, and we actually even got to vote on our favorite projects. The last area that I want to touch on is the importance of hope and joy and celebration in the lives of young people and in our classroom and in our school. And we have had the joy of making partnerships in the community with the U of A compost cats, who taught us about composting to help us get started on our composting. The engineering department at the U of A as well with the sustainable energy, the city of Tucson in our recycling, and our neighborhood associations. So the integral ecology of Laudato Si is kind of calling us into an integral way of addressing and being community together. Within our school community, likewise, we have experienced that kind of coming together with partnership that that is sustaining and supporting one another. And one of the really beautiful pieces that we have experienced in the last couple of years is the work of our Advocate for Us All Club in reaching out and in partnering and in being accompanied by our Tohono O'odham students and community. And we've been blessed by having Elder and Leader Jerry Carlisle as part of our Earth Day celebration for the last 2 years. So how we celebrate hope. Appreciate the winners. That's a photograph of students who were homeroom challenge winners for composting. We use Instagram and WhatsApp at our school all the time. Encouraging stories that I use in my classroom. CRS is a good source, and I like World Wildlife Magazine for kind of a global perspective. This is a celebration of Earth Words that was put together by one of our science teachers. And this is a celebration of the beautiful places that are important in our students' lives. This is a Padlet. And then the last little piece that I just wanted to mention is the importance of music. My students respond to, sing, and are uplifted by music. And if we are smart, we will be using popular music and the messaging in it that is appropriate to help us in this journey. And I've given, a couple of examples here. Count on Me by Bruno Mars, and Pitbull's I Believe That We Will Win, which was written during the AIDS pandemic, but it is absolutely applicable to what we are doing. And students love to hear that in the background, in the classroom, in the hallways. A couple of other choices from popular music I've included, but I also wanted to just acknowledge that liturgically, we do have sources that we can use in terms of music. And I've got a couple of choices, for that particular part of our school life. How Great Thou Art, Laudato Si. And I wanted to do a shout out for Bearer of Hope, because the chorus of it is in English, Vietnamese, and Spanish. And the lyrics are fantastic. So if you're not familiar with Bearer of Hope, you can find it on YouTube. And a last little shout out to Carmelites. Jessica Powers' poetry, powerful for nature and the presence of God. And I have also included in my slides a brand new scholarly article from Father Eduardo Augusto Scarell, who is a Carmelite priest scientist. He was on the original commission of scientists that advised Pope Francis in the writing of the encyclical. And he has done a masterful scholarly look at Titus Bronsma, Saint Titus Bronsma, and the way that he foreshadows some of the creation theology or the care for creation theology in Laudato Si. I've got that linked as well for those of you who are theologically minded. And I want to offer as a suggestion for further steps, the Ignatian Solidarity Network tomorrow, Centering Ecological Action and Gratitude. Sign up for that. You don't have to be there in person. You can, do that on the recorded side of it. That's what I'm going to do. And then, of course, we're all part of God's planet, as Jose pointed out. And I've got several sources, and I hope that you'll find them to be helpful, useful, and include some of them in your prep, your professional development, your teacher formation, or in your classroom.
Thank you so much, Kate. Just wanting to reflect, one of the comments is that was an electrifying presentation. One of the top 5 presentations she's seen in all that time.
Oh my gosh, you are so, thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you for that wonderful shout out. And wanting to get quickly to the questions, I know time is precious. So a question to Sage, but also to all of the panelists, and this comes from Diana. In what ways can older adults serve as effective allies to youth and young adults who are working on these solutions? And I pose that to all three of the panelists, starting, I think, with Aaron. Yes.
I actually would love to hear from Sage first, as a young person listening to young people. I mean, I guess listening just intuitively feels like the most important response there, from where I am. But Sage, do you have some wisdom on that one?
Okay, I'm looking at the questions. Was this the one about older adults serving it? Is that the one? Okay. That's a great question, and it's really frustrating. I was just on a Zoom with a ton of other it was like people under 25 who are like racial justice leaders, union organizers, climate activists. It was a really great group of people, but we were all kind of lamenting how scarce resources are. A lot of us have nonprofits and we're struggling to fund them, or even just individuals who are activists who are struggling to pay the bills. It's interesting because there's a lot of high visibility people who actually behind the scenes are not receiving resources. So if there's a connection you can make for a young person, or there's some way that you can help support and connect young people with the resources that we need to be building power, I think that's really valuable. At this point, I think there definitely still does need to be more media attention, and more mainstream platforming of, progressive voices for sure, on television and whatnot. But I think there's a little too much, like, I don't know, like awards, for example. Like there's all these lists of like, these 10 climate activists are, it's like, okay, but like, how are we going to actually sustain a movement? So it's not an easy answer, it's not an easy question to answer.
Thank you. I don't know, Kate, if you have a response to that. You're on mute, or you.
All right, there we go. Listening, I would certainly say that that's job one. I think the other way is that we need to model engagement. We need to not be afraid to address. And that's why I love Katharine Hayhoe so much, is that we don't have to know all of the answers, but we have to just go with what we know now, and we'll learn more. We have to be a people of hope. And I think that's what we can do as older folks, not get paralyzed.
Thank you. A challenging question coming from Dennis. And this is to Kate, but I think for all of you who I think are swimming upstream as we are with the Covenant as well, with a lot of these challenges, has there been resistance to the Laudato Si lessons and projects from students, parents, or faculty? If so, what form did they take, and how were they addressed, and what was the outcome?
I have to say that our experience since the pandemic, people get it. It's not, we don't have to make an argument anymore. They get it. That's been our experience.
I would say, I haven't seen resistance. I think the concerns are more, I don't know if it's apathy, but just like a turning away, or just the not you know, taking action. So like there is, you know, as a university, we are moving toward really becoming a Laudato Si university and embracing the goals of the Laudato Si action platform. It's just working within the university structures and making those visible changes. I think that's the challenge. It's more just structure, maybe bureaucracy, but not a lack of, but I haven't, you know, received resistance, like active resistance from anyone.
Great, thank you. So there's a theme arising from several of these questions, and it regards widening the circles that you're currently in, intergenerational or across other educational institutions. Do you have any advice on an experience on how you're expanding your circles beyond where you are right now? Pose that to, we'll start with Sage, I guess. Yeah.
I think I have a very unique take on that, just because the point of my work and program is to continue to expand to new audiences. So it's less of a translatable thing that I can give people advice to, or advice for. So, you know, for me with my work, it is really easy to reach and establish new audiences. But I would also say, especially for the young folks in the room, do not underestimate the power of social media. I mean, I've gotten so many opportunities and visibility off of writing a sentence on a screen and putting a trending audio on it and post it on TikTok, and it goes viral. Like it's pretty, you know, there's a formula to using social media for good. I could literally, to make a TikTok about how I thought my climate education was to doomsday. And so I started my own program, and it goes viral, and it's like a 5-second video. So, you know, if you are trying to expand your audience, I definitely think social media is an underrated way to do that and reach more people than you would be able to in person.
Erin or Kate, have any thoughts on expanding your circles?
You know, one of the things that we were most surprised by when we did our e-waste collection to recycle was the number of the folks who came were parents, and they were friends of our parents. So we wound up tapping into a need that we hadn't even realized was there. As a school, we had a lot of computer equipment that needed to be dealt with because it was obsolete. All of our families have that as well, and it's all sitting in their homes. And that was a big revelation to us. And we could probably do that once a month. And, you know, we'd have grandmas and aunts and uncles and lots of folks, because they know they shouldn't dump them and they want to do the right thing. So that's our big success intergenerationally, practical as it is.
I think there's too this great opportunity with the focus within Laudato Si on integral ecology and working across faith traditions as well. I mean, I feel like that's a great, you know, a way of expanding the circle of engagement. So, you know, in San Francisco, we have an interfaith council. You know, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Interfaith Power and Light, like bringing together faith communities around this. I think it's a really great way of expanding their commitment and the impact also of the university in my context.
Great, thank you. I'm going to shift a little bit with this bold question from Sister Rose Therese, asking all of you to answer. We'll start with Erin. What would you say to government leaders at the SDG UN meeting in September, particularly President Biden, or any world leaders? What would your message be?
I would say visit Sage's organization and go through the curriculum. It needs to be, I was really moved by what you said, Sage, around shifting toward, this fearful message toward really looking at concrete things we can do. What I appreciate also about your approach, there was this connection of what I can do as an individual, right? I can choose a plant-based diet. I can, reduce plastic, but there's also this interrogation of the systems of like, let's look at the supply chain. Let's look at like who's interested is being served by these structures. So I would say it needs to be structural and it needs to touch us where we make decisions.
I am working on getting into that room. Right now, I will be I'm speaking at the Clinton Global Initiative in September during Climate Week, and I'm working my way into getting a private conversation with President Clinton. But I'm trying to get my way into that conversation with Joe Biden. And I do have some friends who have met with him on a pretty frequent basis, so not too far off. And so I will scold him appropriately and make sure there's some solid next steps. I'm a little bit known for that. I was just yelling at a Coca-Cola executive and I was just like, you guys owe reparations, like, let's talk. So I think I'm talking to the CEO of Coca-Cola pretty soon. You're gonna hear from me. Like, I'm very pushy.
Thank you, Kate.
Gosh, that's so overwhelming of an idea. I'm more a local. My vision is pretty local. Canceling international debt, that's still on the agenda. We've been asking for that for decades, and that would go a long way to helping some steps toward economic, security. So I'll say that.
So folks can join our Encounter campaign. That is one of our platforms, and we're also working in collaboration with other Catholic and faith organizations with regard to that. So putting in a little pitch there. But notwithstanding, so we, the Covenant, are grounded in our faith and wanting to be consistent with Catholic social teaching. So I wanted to ask this question. How are your students' faith, or how is your faith inspired by what you do, knowing that the joy of the gospel is fundamental to what we do? It's been around for 2,000 years, and it is still clearly relevant, absolutely essential to everything, including what we're doing with regard to ecological education. So how have you seen faith being strengthened from your students by what they do, by what you're doing? I'm going to start with Kate.
The strongest experiences that I have seen of that happening have been with the groups of students that I take with me when we go to the migrant center to be in accompaniment with our migrant brothers and sisters and their families. And those are, without a doubt, the most transformative and the most connecting to a sense of grace, of kind of a family of God, and it gives them a whole different understanding of what Jesus's teachings call them to.
Erin, do you have a thought?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I mentioned this in my talk. I do think that Laudato Si, but I think just Pope Francis and the person of Pope Francis has been it's just such a treasure in being able to reach I think young people, again, who relate to faith in various ways but still have these longings. Like, I do think that Catholic social teaching, which teaches us that we're all connected and that the person is, that the dignity and value of the person is not about what you achieve or what you earn or, what title you have. It's liberating. And so I do think that seeing the freedom in that, and in the message on Laudato Si, that we're connected, that choosing to not embrace the kind of consumerist kind of cycle, right? That, like, finding freedom from that, I think it's liberating. So I do see that is a way that it's been renewing, I think, for me and my own faith commitment to see that freedom, but I think it impacts students as well.
Thank you. And I want to pose the question a little bit differently for Sage, knowing that your curriculum already just brings hope. I'm not even sure if she's still here, but your curriculum still brings hope. Have you seen students step more into, I guess, the spiritual or faith dimensions as a result of experiencing your curriculum?
That's an interesting question. We actually just the past year introduced a new little unit at the Berkeley program about the emotional aspect and the grounding aspect, the personal connection of having a personal connection with the earth. Because I think a lot of the times when we talk about sustainability, it's like abstract. And my team member, Ellie, was very struck by this quote she heard that was like, you can't make people fall in love with the earth with statistics. Just kind of like, people aren't going to really feel personally compelled and attached to fight for something if it's just like, well, 70% of that. So spirituality and that sort of thing, like, means something different to everyone. And I would never want to have some sort of prescription within the program of like, you must believe this or something, but kind of just calling people back to the earth and calling people to cultivate that personal connection with the earth in whatever way, in whatever framework or religious framework they have, I think is a beautiful way of kind of reminding people that we do have this greater connection, a greater purpose, that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you all so much. We're going to come to a close, and I'm so thankful for you panelists and the expertise and wisdom and commitment and dedication you bring to your vocations. I think we can call them vocations. And also want to just do a little bit of a shout out to the Covenant and to the all of you who have hung on for this entire time. If you're wanting to ask if you're willing to support the Covenant in helping defray the costs of this conference, please feel free to donate, and I'm going to put a link in the chat. And then also to note that we're also having another session on Thursday. And then also wanting to close out with a prayer, and noting that at the beginning of the school year, there was at my parish, Good Shepherd Catholic Church, they were handing out these little bookmarks, and you see Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton here, and on the other side is Blessed Carlo Acutis, who is a student who passed away in 2006, who is now blessed. And this is a prayer for the students, for the people that you serve, Kate, Aaron, and Sage. And so if we can take a moment of silence and close with this prayer. Lord our God, in your wisdom and love, you surround us with the mysteries of the universe. Send your Spirit upon the students and fill them with your wisdom and blessings. Grant that we may devote ourselves, grant that they may devote themselves to their studies and draw ever closer to you, the source of all knowledge. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Blessed Carlo Acutis, pray for us. Thank you, friends. It's been a blessing to be with you. Have a good night.